Well, welcome to Monday Morning MotoGP, presented by Horsepower Rodeo. I'm Ryan, I'm your host, and we're going to talk about everything from the Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas in COTA. This isn't their typical live. For those who don't know and aren't on TikTok right now, this is going out as a TikTok live stream, but will be reposted on YouTube and Spotify podcasters. And if you weren't watching in COTA this weekend, you should go back and watch it because it was a hell of a race. Bunch of things I want to talk about today. First and foremost, obviously, I want to talk about Maverick Viñales and his amazing weekend at the Circuit of the Americas. I want to talk about Marc Marquez's crash, and I want to talk about Joe Roberts in Moto2, and of course, you cannot talk about MotoGP these days without talking about Pedro Acosta. So first of all, Maverick. I mean, this guy maybe had the best career of his weekend. The other way around. The best weekend of his career. First of all, on Saturday, the pole position he pulls to get the track record after Jorge Martin kind of broke it on Friday. I think everyone in the paddock thought, man, Jorge Martin is just going to run away with this weekend. Maverick comes through on Saturday and proves what incredible speed he has on that Aprilia. And then he wasn't done. Just dominates the sprint. We never see him start the way he started in the sprint. Gets to the front, never looks back, never put a foot wrong. The motorcycle was perfect. Kills it on Saturday. Then we get into Sunday, and things didn't go quite as well for Maverick. He gets punted in the first corner by a combination of Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, and then he almost runs into the back of Marc Marquez. I don't know if that's talked about enough. I mean, this could have gone so much worse for Maverick, but he ends lap 1 in 11th place, works his way through the entire pack, and wins the race by a second and a half. That's how fast he was on Sunday. And I think that's a big reason why this race was so exciting, because the fastest guy did not get the whole shot and didn't just disappear into the distance. He had a really rough start, but because he was the fastest guy, he could kind of make up all those spaces. And a lot is kind of said in MotoGP and in Formula One about overtaking. There's no overtaking. We need overtaking. We need passes. But if you look at the way Grand Prix motorcycling and Formula One is set up, it's not set up for overtaking. Like, that's not the way it's set up to work. Think about it. The way qualifying works is you put all the guys on the track, and the fastest one starts at the front, and then each rider gets progressively slower as you go to the back of the grid. So why would there be overtaking if the fast guys are at the front and the slow guys are at the back? Unless someone gets a bad start or a bad strategy or has a wreck or makes a mistake, you know, the guys behind technically, like, what do you call it, physically, I guess, have the advantage because they have a slipstream, they have a little bit of a draft, and Formula One, they can use DRS. But the way Grand Prix motorcycling is set up isn't for overtaking. It's not to maximize that. Now, I don't know a better way to do it. We can pitch on ways to fix it. A lot of people online like to pitch this reverse grid order, meaning the guys qualify and then you flip the grid around, you put the fastest guy at the back, which just wouldn't work in any universe. I guess we could do a lottery system. We could just put all the riders' names in a hat and just figure out who starts when, or they could all just take turns in a rotation. But all I'm saying is that what Maverick did and why the race was so exciting was because he was the fastest guy, but had to do most of the race from mid-pack. And so when you're starting and you're putting the fastest guy in the middle of the pack, now you have a rider that has potential to make overtakes. He's got the talent to do it. He can go through the entire field and just kind of pick them off. And it was a lot of fun to watch, because then what you have is the riders who are second, third, very close in their speed, were all fighting for the lead. They weren't fighting for second and third and fourth. I mean, Acosta and Martin were fighting for the lead because Maverick just didn't make this whole shot and disappear into the future. A lot of people like to blame the aero. Everyone likes to say, oh, it's the aero. No one can pass because of the new aero era and all this stuff. And I think I like nostalgia too. I love the good old days. But I also think that when we think about the good old days, we think about the classic races. We think about the amazing Rossi, Lorenzo, Stoner, Pedrosa. We think about these races that went down to the wire and were, one-on-one battles. But if you go back and look at the good old days, very rarely did we have 5 guys running at the front in the good old days, where in the first 10 laps of the race on Sunday, any one of those 5 guys could have taken the lead and won the race. And we didn't see a lot of that in the good old days. It was a lot of one-on-one battles. A lot of races in MotoGP are one guy disappears into the distance. We don't even see that guy for the majority of the race. And the battles happen for the last spots on the podium. Like, I'm just being honest here. I love classic MotoGP. 2009 Catalunya, like the Laguna Seca battle with Rossi and Stoner. I love that stuff. But those were like anomaly races. We get 3 or 4 races like that a year. And the rest of the races are kind of like motorcycle races that are set up in a grid where the fastest guy's at the front. And if he takes off at the front, there's no one that can catch him because he's the fastest. And I think the same would have been said for this weekend. If Maverick would have gotten the start that he could have gotten, like if he would have gotten the start on Sunday that he got on Saturday, we would have never seen a battle at the front because Maverick would have won this race by 20 seconds. He would have disappeared into the abyss, and the rest of the riders would just be picking up the scraps of second, third, and fourth, which, again, can be exciting, but it wouldn't have been for the lead. And I think the thing that was so great about Sunday's race is when Martin and Acosta are fighting, they were fighting for the lead. When Martin and Marc Marquez got into the mix, they were fighting for the lead of the race. When Marc Marquez got to the lead, he crashed out of the lead. It was all at the front, which we don't get all the time in MotoGP, in any form of motorsport. So it was what a performance. I think it's the best performance of Maverick's career. I think he knows it is. I don't know what happened to him in the offseason. He lost a bunch of weight. He got super lean. He's a different human being this year. It's amazing. It's incredible to see. Just the look on his face of confidence, even after Portimao, where he won the sprint there, was very, very good in the main race. The bike gives up on him, spits him off, lands in the dirt. I think the old Maverick Viñales gets up and really shakes his head and is really upset with what happened to him in that race. But he got up and go, no, like, we have the potential, and it was just a fluke mechanical issue we had. But look, I'm running at the front. What more can I ask for? So it speaks to a little bit of maturity on Maverick's part to see him kind of take that in stride last week, going, well, no, what I learned from last week is we have the speed. And if I like a track, and if I feel good, and the bike feels good, we can win races. And that is a lot of confidence he's taking in now, going back to Europe, going back to Spain, and maybe some tracks he's not quite as happy with. Like, he really does like the Portimao circuit. He loves Coda, and he showed it this weekend. I mean, it was on the next level. I think a lot of people like to throw around the term alien, and I don't know if I'm ready to put Maverick in the alien category quite yet. Because he's done this before. He's had amazing races. He had Qatar a few years back where he went from like 6th to 1st and just cut through the field. He's had these races, but then it just kind of all falls apart. I want to see if Maverick can really, really, really do it and really get a run of races going and compete for a world title and just even have his name near the top for most of the season before I start putting him in the alien category. But I mean, I don't know what to say to people who still say, again, maybe this is just an exciting race in an otherwise boring era of MotoGP, but I also don't quite see it that way. I thought last year was one of the best seasons we had in MotoGP. It was close. The championship was close. No one ran away with it. It went down to the last race like we want it to. I think the sprints were a good addition to the calendar. They're a little mayhem. They're not very safe. They cause a lot of injuries. But for the most part, the pack stayed together points-wise, and it was entertaining to watch people like you didn't expect to be there, like Marco Bezzecchi. He was not supposed to be competing for a title last year on a year-old bike. It was supposed to be the VR46, like dipping their toe in a MotoGP, and this kid is competing for a title. And I think this year with Maverick, he could be this exciting dark horse that comes out. But yeah, hats off to him. Ride of his career. What a job by Maverick Viñales. It made the race so exciting. I'd forgotten about him. I was watching the race. I was watching the battle at the front between Pedro Acosta and Martin and Marc Marquez, just praying Martin just didn't get to the front and disappear, watching the racecraft. It was an amazing race to watch. And then I was like, wait, where's Maverick? Why isn't he at the top? And then you look, he's 11th. And then he's 9th. And then he was 7th. And he just crept up. And I was like, this guy has the pace to do this. Halfway through the race, he's already taken half the field. Incredible to watch. It does pose an interesting question, though. Because a week ago, everyone was talking about Fabio Quartararo going to Aprilia. That was going to happen. Fabio Quartararo is going to go to Aprilia and win a new world title there, which I've said many, many times that I don't know if the Aprilia is ready to win a world title. Fabio Quartararo going there doesn't mean he's just going to automatically win one. But that obviously didn't happen. Fabio stayed with Yamaha. Well, now we have everyone talking, well, Jorge Martin is going to leave Ducati and he's going to take that seat at Aprilia. I think the thing that people aren't talking about is what seat? What seat is available at Aprilia? Because you have Aleix Espargaro, who's the captain of that ship, who has guided that motorcycle from nothing to what it is and win races with it. And now you have Maverick Viñales 2 weeks in a row, winning sprints, taking pole, winning main Grand Prix. Is there even a spot at Aprilia for someone like Jorge Martin? Or someone like Fabio Quartararo? I know he's off the board now, but what seat is he taking? Now, there's been a lot of talk about Aleix Espargaro retiring. He's got a very good life outside of motorcycle racing. He's got kids that he adores. Owns restaurants. He's a foodie. He loves to travel. He's got a lot going on outside of motorcycles, and so a lot of people have been talking about him possibly stepping away and retiring at the end of the season. If that happens, well, there you go. That's the seat that is available. If Aleix decides he's not ready to retire, where's the seat at Aprilia? Because right now, I don't see how, if you're Aprilia and you're looking at your two riders, you go, yeah, let's bring in Jorge Martin, pay him top dollar as much as we can afford to pay him. We can't pay him Yamaha crazy money like Fabio got. But yeah, let's bring Jorge Martin over here and compete for a championship. Like, well, who are you kicking out? You're kicking out the guy who has bled Aprilia for his entire career and refused to leave your manufacturer even when it was just doing nothing? Or are you going to kick the guy out who's at the top of his game? Like, what seat are you giving up for someone like Jorge Martin? And do you even need Jorge Martin? Of course, the guy's fast. He's great on the Ducati. Could he be great on the Aprilia? Maybe. Probably. But it would take an adjustment period. It took Maverick. This is Maverick's first win with Aprilia after a full season with them and a half season before that. So it's not just a given that, oh, we'll bring in Jorge Martin and it'll be all great. And we're going to have to pay him top dollar because he's expecting a fully funded factory ride. Where does he go? I mean, okay. So you could ask Aleix Espargaro nicely, hey, like your brother did at KTM, maybe you take a test rider role with the team and move aside and let us bring in kind of a hot new talent. Okay. Or Aleix sees the writing on the wall and says, you know what, I'm not going to make a big stink about this. I'm close enough to retiring. I'm not going to make Aprilia miss out on a talent like Jorge. You know what, I'm going to step back so I don't have to be embarrassed by being fired. Or Aleix becomes competitive, and now you're really left with a situation where you have two competitive riders on the Aprilia, and do we need to bring in anybody else? I think we all get caught up in this hype of riders moving around and, oh, you know what, if this rider moved to this place, I think about it from the team's perspective. They have a team and they have an ecosystem in place that they're happy with. It's an environment they all like to work in. And sometimes bringing in someone new, even if they're amazing, disrupts that balance, disrupts that workflow. If you bring in Jorge Martin and he starts giving you the opposite feedback on the bike as Maverick Viñales, now you're pushing in two directions. And maybe it makes the bike worse. So it's not just as easy as we'll take this talented rider and we'll plug him in over here. There has to be space for all these people, and there's not always space for everyone. And that's the thing I kind of took away from watching this weekend is you can't say goodbye to Maverick when he's at the form that he's at right now. Maybe he cools off as we head to Europe. We head to some tracks he doesn't like as well. Maybe he cools off and gives Aprilia an excuse to look elsewhere. But they plucked him from Yamaha after his career melted down. And they brought him over there for a reason. They brought him over there because they thought he could help their brand. He fits in really well with Aleix. They're very good friends. They're very friendly. They get on very well as teammates. They're probably the friendliest 1-2 duo. They're very happy when each other succeeds. So right now, as it stands, you could say Aleix, they could ask him to step aside because the results aren't there. He's getting towards the tail end of his career. Maybe you could say that. But right now, I don't think there's room at Aprilia for another rider. All right, so before I move on from this whole Maverick Viñales overtake extravaganza, I want to talk about overtaking in general in MotoGP, because I mentioned it at the top that the way the grid is set up, it's not set up to maximize overtaking, it's set up to reward speed. It rewards speed in qualifying with putting you at the front of the grid. And then when you put the fastest riders in front of the slower riders, by nature of the game, that's the order. Like that's how it's going to work. And slower riders aren't going to pass faster riders as much. Yes, there's certain advantages from being the rider behind. I understand draft. I understand overtaking and physics, and I get it. But I'm saying when you put faster riders in front of slower riders, faster riders go faster. It's harder for slower riders to keep up. There's less overtaking. I also understand that it's the best system we have right now, and I can't really think of one better to switch around how qualifying works. Other than maybe you start the season with, the season previous of, hey, this is what the grid is going to be. And then the end of each race determines the grid for the week next. You just get rid of qualifying. I think that's a harebrained idea, but that's the only thing that pops up in my brain of things that would actually work. Of, okay, well, how everyone finished on last Sunday is how they start this Sunday, and then it would just be mayhem because you'd have DNFs and you have people who had bad weeks, you'd have people who had good weeks, you'd have slow riders in the middle, you'd have some sort of fluke crashes that happened that would determine the grid for the next weekend. It would be complete mayhem, and we would all hate it, and we would all talk about it a lot on Monday mornings. But the one thing I want to say about overtaking, and I'm going to preface this a lot with, I don't like boring races either. I would love to see every race be like the race this weekend. I like exciting MotoGP races. But if you need a race to have lots and lots of overtaking to be exciting to you, you don't know very much about the sport you're watching. I'm going to say that again. I like exciting races. I like overtaking. I like this last week in Coda was a treat. It was an amazing race to watch because of how competitive it was and how close these guys were together. But I will say this again. If you need is the operative word here. If you need a race to have lots and lots of overtaking for it to be exciting to you, you don't know anything about motorcycle racing. And this is a point I come back to a lot. All sports are boring if you don't understand them. It's the knock on all sports. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do a series on the TikTok channel about how every sport is boring at its nature, because if you don't understand it, it's just guys playing with the ball for the most part. Think about it. Most of soccer, most of the game, is played in the middle of the field, and it's just a bunch of dudes kicking the ball around the middle of the field. Nowhere near the goal. Nowhere near where it has the opportunity to score. So if you don't understand what they're doing, you don't understand that they're setting up plays, they're setting up to make runs into the scoring area, you don't get it, it's going to be insanely boring to you. Same thing with baseball. Have you ever been to a baseball game that was like what they call a pitching duel, where both pitchers are just on fire? Maybe they're both pitching a no-hitter, and neither team can hit. That is the most boring baseball game in the world, unless you understand the chess match that is pitching. So if you understand the game, you can appreciate it. And this was really brought to my attention as it has to do with jiu-jitsu. So in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, white belt matches, so basically novices, white belt matches are really, really exciting because they are wild, they're unpredictable, these kids throw each other around, they take big chances. Those are the most fun matches to watch because there's a lot of action. As you go up the ranks, as you get up to experts, you get to black belts. Black belt matches in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are insanely boring to watch if you don't understand the chess that's being played. Because it's just kind of two people hugging each other on the floor. Because they know just the smallest move can be taken advantage of and could cause you to lose. And black belt matches in Jiu-Jitsu are boring until they're over. And so I compare that to MotoGP. There's so many races that, oh, this is a really boring race. And it's like, I know, but did you understand the chess that was going on the track? Did you understand the management of fuel, management of tires, the management of pushing versus holding back? Taking risks and understanding the championship versus this race. And I think a lot of people are going to be upset that I'm saying you don't know anything about racing. And you can like racing without knowing anything about it. You can like sports. Go into any sports bar on a Sunday in America and listen to football fans talk about football. They don't know anything about the sport. Oh, that was a penalty? Yes. Yes, sir, that was a penalty. I'm not saying I know everything about the sport. I'm as big an expert as I can be by spending part of my time really obsessed with MotoGP. But when I watch a race, there's a lot of anticipation in every corner. These guys are riding so fast they could crash in every single corner of the racetrack. Every move is a potential crash. So there's a lot of anticipation. And does that anticipation always pay off into crazy overtakes and crashes and really exciting, flashy things? No, it doesn't. It doesn't always do that. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we get coda. Just like we had last week. Sometimes we get that. Sometimes we don't. So if you're the type of motorcycle fan and you find yourself saying, oh, that race was really boring, maybe go back and watch and listen and understand the chess that's being played, because it's not boring. It just wasn't exciting to the amateur eye. If that makes sense. And I'm not trying to bag on anybody. I hear this argument so often that, well, that race was boring. And again, all sports are boring if you don't quite understand them well enough. Anyone can understand overtaking. Like, anyone can understand that, like, passing is exciting. That's like the bare minimum barrier for entry in a sport of, oh, goals in soccer are really, really exciting. But the midfield play sets up those goals. And if you don't understand the midfield play, then the game's boring. Cricket's really freaking boring. Unless you understand what's going on in the game and how, I don't know any cricket terms, so I'm going to butcher these, but how the pitching works. And there's a wicket. I know there's a wicket. But I think I've made my point. So if you need a race to be erratic and unpredictable and wild, what you're really asking for is you're asking to watch an amateur race. And it's the reason that Moto3, and I'm not calling Moto3 riders amateurs by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of reasons that Moto3 is really exciting. But like, that's why Moto3 is so wild and unpredictable, because these kids are very raw. Whereas we have master chess players playing in MotoGP. I like to say, like, so exciting an amateur can understand it. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the Marc Marquez crash in COTA, because Marc looked really, really, really strong on Sunday, and he looked very motivated to win. I think he really wanted to make COTA his statement win of this comeback. If I can win here, I can win anywhere. Sorry. And at first look, that crash looked kind of more of the same from Marc Marquez. Marc pushing way too hard, not understanding the limits of himself, not understanding the limits of the bike, because we know he's going to throw everything at it. And I think at first glance it kind of looked that just the typical Marc Marquez overriding a motorcycle crash. Here we go again. Well, it came out post-race that he was actually having problems with the front brake, that when he was pulling the front brake, he wasn't getting any response. And so there were several corners where he was pulling the brake 2 or 3 times just to get the bike stopped because, I don't know, it was a hydraulic issue, electronics issue, whatever it is, he wasn't getting the brakes. Like, if you don't know on a MotoGP bike, it's not like a normal motorcycle when you pull the brakes in and the lever has a lot of give. These levers on these bikes are really, really stiff. It's almost just like they're like welded in place. So when you pull the brake, the only feedback you're getting is from the motorcycle itself, not the lever itself. There's very, very little feeling in the lever. Well, apparently when he was pulling the brake, it was basically pinching his hands against the bars. He was getting nothing. He said, hey, I pulled the brake and no one was home. Which is a big deal because if he's riding around at the front and he was having this happen all race long and he was having brake issues, it's amazing he was staying at the front at all at that point. I mean, he was racing with the best of the best. And then he's having issues, kind of like Maverick last week where he's having gearbox issues the entire freaking race. And then finally it gave up. But despite having the issues, he was still riding at the front. So I do feel bad for Marc in this instance because Marc Marquez, you can say whatever you want about the guy. He very rarely comes in and blames the bike when he doesn't do well. He doesn't make excuses. He goes, hey, I made a mistake. I pushed too hard. You know, he can say like the bike's not very good. When I was at Honda last year, it's like, well, we're not that great and I'm pushing too hard, and he can be frustrated, but he very rarely gets off the bike and goes, hey, I had an issue with X, if he really didn't have an issue. So I actually do believe Marc when he says, I had a brake issue. I felt really good. I felt really strong. And I feel for the guy because that was his chance to haul back a bunch of points early in the season, to put his name in the hat in the championship. And now he's going into week 4 in Jerez with 2 DNFs, which does not help. So let's talk about that directly. Putting this crash aside, he's had 2 DNFs. Is Marc Marquez back? Is he ready to compete for a world title? I don't know yet because the season it's early enough, but I think there's a condition on whether or not Marc Marquez is ready to compete for a world title. And this is the condition. If someone else starts running away with the title as we go into Europe, he's not going to catch up. If Jorge Martin gets on a run and just puts everyone behind him and wins 5 consecutive races and 4 consecutive sprints and just dominates and, pulls a Marc Marquez 2019, Marc has no chance of catching up from this deficit he's created for himself in the first 3 weeks. But if we can see Pecco and Enea and Maverick and Acosta and Binder and Martin all mix it up at the front in the next month or 2 of the season, it's going to give Marc Marquez enough time to claw back those points. As long as someone different is winning every week, and Marc is staying consistent and riding at the front and getting rid of some of these DNFs. Obviously, the incident with Pecco, it's unfortunate. They were both fighting, both being aggressive. It was unfortunate. This week, very unfortunate because he's leading the race and he has a crash all on his own. No controversy, just DNF. Not great for him. But if he can claw back those points, I think he can be in the hunt at the summer break, and then we'll really see it turn on in the new year. The thing that's the most impressive about this, think about this for a second. Marc Marquez went from riding a Honda to jumping on a Ducati. He changed bikes completely. And he's made that adjustment better than other riders have made an adjustment just from going from a 2022 bike, which is a Ducati, to the 2023 bike. He switched manufacturers, had to relearn everything about riding the motorcycle in the best way possible. And he's making a better transition than the Ducati riders who just moved up a year. Because if you look at the other riders who are on a 2023 spec bike, along with Marc Marquez, you have Fabio Di Giannantonio, who's basically the closest to Marc Marquez, and he's running mid-pack. He's squeaking into Q2, and he's running mid-pack in the races. Bezzecchi is behind him, and Alex Marquez is nowhere. So you have Marc Marquez coming over from Honda, and I mean, how can you argue that the guy isn't just pulling off brilliance so far to be competitive on a bike that took Jorge Martin half of last year to even get close on? Jorge Martin, I think a lot of people forget this. The first half of last year, Jorge Martin did not have that bike figured out. Pecco was the only one who really figured out the 2023 machine early on and won races and was competitive. And even he crashed at COTA last year. So I think we have to kind of check ourselves with the Marc Marquez expectations, saying, wow, Marc's crashing, Marc's same old Marc. I don't know, because he's riding that 2023 machine better than any of the other Ducati riders are riding it. And they've all been there longer than he has. I think it's pretty impressive. Again, whether he can fight for the world title will depend solely on whether or not it's a fight at the front or someone runs away with it. Because I could see someone getting on a tear and just being the guy that finishes first every week and then everyone else is finishing second, third. Think about back to 2019 when Marc was so dominant on the Honda. I think Marc had a DNF in Austin that year. Other than that, he was first or second in every single race. And the reason it was not even a close competition was that every week it was a different rider that challenged him. It was an Alex Rins at Silverstone. It was Fabio Quartararo. It was someone different every single week that was mixing it up with him. But it wasn't, Dovizioso. It wasn't another rider that could be as consistent as him. So even if he got beat, he was getting beat by someone he wasn't really competing with. He gets beat by Alex Rins in Silverstone. Rins wasn't competing for the title that year. It was a great race, one of my favorites of all time. But if it was Davi beating him in Silverstone and beating him in Assen, and coming back and forth and all season long, then we have a close title fight. But if he's finishing first or second and it's a different guy every week he's riding with, then it's just going to be a championship runaway. So it'll be interesting to see if one of these guys can kind of separate themselves. For example, if there's a Jorge Martin, or if Maverick, now that he's kind of found his form, if one of these guys can just kind of run away with it and be in the top 2, 3 every single week, and the rest of the spots on the podium are kind of there for the taking for anybody, it's going to be a really long season for everyone, including Marc Marquez. Now we can't talk MotoGP without talking about Pedro Acosta. I don't know what can be said that hasn't already been said, but let's just say it all again. Because when I'm talking about Marc Marquez going from Honda to Ducati and adjusting quickly, here we have a kid coming in from Moto2 to MotoGP and adjusting insanely quickly. 3 weeks in, he's ridden at the front. I mean, no one expected him week 1 to be where he was. He decided to run at the front, learn as much as he could, didn't care about his tires, burned the hell out of them, and fell back. But that's what he was there to do. And it took him one race to go, okay, I know how not to do that now. I know how to be fast, and now I'll start learning how to tire manage, and I'll ride at the front with these guys. I mean, it's impressive. And I think the most impressive thing, besides just the results, we have 2 podiums and 3 weekends for a rookie, is he's rattling the cages of these experienced riders. He is rattling them by the way he rides, by the way he carries himself, and with the shrug of, oh yeah, you guys all said MotoGP was hard. Come on, it's just racing, it's simple. And there's a bunch of ways specifically he's rattling their cages, and I want to kind of go through them because I think maybe that's the part we're not talking about enough. I think we're talking a ton about how impressive he's been. But I don't know if we're talking enough about the specific things he's doing to the riders that is really rattling everyone else. And the first thing about it is what he's doing on the track, right? How he's fitting into the front of this grid. He's being competitive. He's showing how aggressive he's going to be. He's showing all these riders what it looks like to be actually aggressive, but clean. I haven't seen a lot of dirty passing from Pedro. Aggressive passing, aggressive moves, very late on the brakes, getting that bike sideways. but I haven't seen a lot of dirty riding out of him. But I have seen very aggressive riding, and I think that is intentional. I think he's riding extra aggressively early in the season because it's working. He's not crashing, so he can keep doing it. If he was crashing all the time, we would see a little bit of a change in tactics maybe. But he's demonstrating that, hey, I'm going to come at you. If I'm behind you, I'm going to come after you. I'm not in the phase of my rookie season where I sit back and I'm just happy to learn. Like, he's past the I'm just happy to be here stage of his MotoGP career. I'm going to show you the front wheel. I'm going to make sure you know I'm there. I'm going to make the pass. Here I come. If you pass me, I'm going to try to get the cut back and get back in front right away. I'm not just going to sit back and let you run your own race. I'm going to disrupt you. Was he what we call an industry disruptor? That's exactly what I would call him right now. And there's also no pressure. There's also no pressure on him to win a title as a rookie. As much as we want to say, oh, he could be the youngest rider, like, in the grand scheme of things, who cares? In the grand scheme of his career, he'll look back, and I don't think he'll really care whether or not he was the youngest rider to win a Grand Prix or a world title. He's looking at this long term. Like, that's how this kid thinks. He's 19 years old. Last year in Moto2, they kept asking him, MotoGP, 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 and he kept saying, I'm focused on the Moto2 World Championship right now. I haven't won it yet. When that's finished, then I can start looking forward to MotoGP and be excited about the new contract and all that. I'm not looking forward past that. Again, this weekend, he's asked, are you a title contender? He's like, well, I mean, I don't want to think about that. I want to think about this race. I want to think about the next race. I want to think about getting my first win. I'm going to take this one bite at a time. It's like the Marines say, how do you sit down and eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what Pedro Acosta is doing. But I love him basically on the track with his riding, saying to the other riders, I'm not here to learn. I'm beyond that. I'm past that. I've learned it. And of course, there's more that he can learn. Not saying he's figured it all out, but he's basically saying to the other riders, no. I'm not here to learn. I'm here to compete now. I'm competing. I mean, look at the racecraft he demonstrated on Sunday. It wasn't just speed. Martin went through. He took him back on the cutback. Martin tried to go through again. He took him back on the cutback. This is after getting the whole shot out of the first corner. Then Martin gets to the lead, and I kind of thought maybe Martin would be gone. He would just put his head down and just disappear off into the distance, and Pedro Acosta reeled him back in. It's another defining characteristic of a race. It's another tool in your race bag, not just overtaking, but when someone gets the gap, all right, he's got the gap. Was Pedro letting his front tire cool off a little bit, not tucked in right behind Martin and then taking a run at him like Marquez has talked about? Maybe. But he didn't panic when Martin got a little bit of a lead. He reeled him right back in. When Marc Marquez got into the lead, they have their battle. He doesn't let Marc Marquez go. He sticks right behind him. And I don't want to say forced Marc into the mistake, but it's, if he's not there, is Marc pushing that hard? Is Marc thinking in the back of his mind like he has to brake as late as possible? And with the brakes not working, they kind of let him down. It's 3 weeks in, and he's showing these guys, I don't have any holes in my game. And the holes I do have, I'm going to fix very quickly. Oh yeah, first week, tire management, yada, yada, yada. I wasn't even thinking about that. Now that I'm thinking about that, look how good I am at it. I can race up here with you all. Off the track is a little more exciting. No, it's not more exciting. It's a different level of exciting. Off the track, the stuff that Pedro Acosta is saying is rattling cages, and you're kidding yourself if you don't think the other riders haven't noticed. Because I noticed, and I'm not in the paddock. The first thing was at the press conference pre-event this weekend. He's asked about Kevin Schwantz, about the legend, American legend Kevin Schwantz, and he immediately says, more riders need to be like Kevin Schwantz. And there's been some articles written about this already that you can go read that kind of backs up what I'm talking about. He's not only talking, Kevin Schwantz is a very accessible human being, a guy who will stand out with the crowd and sign autographs and stay till the last fan and talk to young racers and really gives a lot to the sport of motorcycle racing. And I think part of his comment was directed at that. But there are a lot of MotoGP riders that do that right now. You see Bezzecchi, you see Jack Miller out there signing autographs. You see Marc Marquez on Saturday pulling the fan up into the stage. These riders are more accessible than in a lot of other sports. But I think his main point is that modern MotoGP is so homogenized, it's so polished, it's so corporate. Everyone's coached. We have English coaches and PR coaches and media coaches, and we're always supposed to say the right thing. And I think he was kind of throwing at the other guys like, hey, you're all a little boring. Like, nothing that comes out of your mouth is ever exciting. There's no sound bites here. There's no passion. And if you want to dig a knife into a motorcycle racer, tell them they lack passion. It's not an accident that he's making these statements. Like, I don't even know. He might have paid that reporter to ask the question about Kevin Schwantz, because without that question, I don't think we are having this conversation. And I kind of give the media a hard time sometimes with the questions that are asked in the press conference that are just kind of, A, the riders can't answer, or B, they're going to give a boring answer to. And this was such an off-the-wall question from someone in the media. What do you guys think of Kevin Schwantz? Because we're in the Americas. And I was like, wow, what a dumb question. And then it turned into the best question of the weekend. But I kind of agree with him. I like a lot of the MotoGP riders. I like Pecco fine. But I did feel last year the only one really bringing it was Marco Bezzecchi as far as the personality. Like, when Marco was on the podium and in those post-race behind-the-scenes shots, and he's cursing on camera and just letting his words fly, and the stuff he says in the press conferences were better when Marco Bezzecchi was in them. And I was like, this is what we've been missing since Rossi left MotoGP. This is what we've been missing, is this personality, this person who doesn't care about the corporate answer that the bosses want him to say, and just be very even and very boring. Like, there's a different side to PR. There's the corporate side of PR and being politically correct and not saying the wrong thing. But the reason we loved Valentino was of the outlandish celebrations and, these things that made him stand out from just, like, these guys wear helmets and full leather race suits on the motorcycle. They're very unrecognizable on the bike as a human being. They're machines, right? They're machines on machines. Valentino made himself into a human, and Bez does that. And I think Pedro Acosta basically pointing out, like, I can't tell any of y'all apart. You're all the same. Same boring MotoGP, yada, yada, yada. Respect for my competitors, and we're going to try really hard, and we're working really hard, and we're hoping that we have a good weekend, and we just have to work harder, and, like, play a drinking game at the next MotoGP press conference. Every time someone says, we're working hard, or we're working in a good way, it's the answer. It's the answer they've been coached to give. So he's calling these guys out before the race, and then post-race. This was the most important one to me. Asked about the race over and over again, he said, oh man, it was just great racing with the boys. It was just great racing with the boys. It is not by accident he's calling the other riders the boys. It's not an accident. It's not a slip of the tongue. It's a statement. Because think about it. Think Pedro Acosta has been in this paddock quite a while now. Coming up through Moto3, through Moto2, he's always been the kid. Even Jack Miller a couple years ago, they were riding, I think Acosta was still in Moto3, and they were all riding together. Maybe it was Phillip Island. And Jack Miller's like, man, the kid's fast. Kid's good. I can learn a lot from him. The kid's got talent. Even this year, oh man, the kid's fast in MotoGP. Oh, the kid rookie, the rookie wonder boy. Terms I've used. He's saying, I'm not a kid. If I'm a kid, you're the boys. No one's above me. I'm not above anyone else. We're contemporaries. So it's a very strategic way of basically calling everyone around him. I don't think he's looking down at them. He's not calling them the boys because he thinks less of them. I think he's calling them the boys to say, nah, it's just another day out with the boys. Casual. Normal. I don't need to be called a kid. I'm one of the boys now. You guys aren't men. You guys aren't above me. They're not the men and the kids. It's the boys. It's kind of like when you're hanging out with your friends, just a fun racing outing, no pressure, just casual time. He's letting everyone else know. No biggie. I'm here. So are you. Equal footing. Man, I love that. All right, the last thing I want to talk about before I let you all go on the live is Joe Roberts, because I'm talking about the American rider. I'm American. For all those who aren't American, sorry, you're going to have to listen to me talk about Joe Roberts in Moto2. There's been a lot of talk since Trackhouse Racing came into MotoGP. At their launch party, Joe Roberts, the American racing team in Moto2, they were there. Here in Los Angeles, they were there at the launch party, talking MotoGP, launching the team. And it was the topic of conversation from week one. Is Joe Roberts a shoo-in to go to Trackhouse Racing because they are very forward with saying that they want an American rider on their American team motorcycle? There was no doubt. VR46 wants Italian riders on their motorcycle. Ducati wants Italian riders on their motorcycle. Repsol wants Spanish riders on their motorcycle. This is not a new thing in MotoGP. Idemitsu Team Asia wants a Japanese rider on their motorcycle. This is how it goes. Just like in F1, Mercedes wants German rider. They would love to have a German frickin' driver. Sponsors want what sponsors want. Teams want what teams want. So there's been a lot made of, wow, Joe Roberts is going to go to MotoGP because of Trackhouse. But I do think it's a little unfair because he does have to prove himself. They don't want a slow American rider. Like, they don't want to bring in an American rider that is going to just ride around in last place and can't compete. So yeah, could his American passport help him get the job? Of course. Let's not be naive about it. But also, he has to perform. And so far this year, he's performed. 3 races in, 3 top 10s, a 7th place and 2 seconds. He's in 2nd place in the championship by 2 points. He's ahead of Fermin Aldeguer in the championship after 3 races. So I think a lot of people are being very hard on Joe Roberts, saying, oh, well, he's just going to go to MotoGP because he's American, and not really looking at, no, he's been pretty impressive. He's been pretty fast. Now, can he carry that all the way through the European races? We will see. And I think he needs to be competitive week after week to prove to MotoGP that he's ready, that he has the speed, that he's the old Joe back. People like to forget that Joe was on kind of an upward trajectory. Aprilia was looking at him earlier in his career when he was still with American Racing. He opted to go to Italtrans, try to win the Moto2 championship, maybe get a better seat in MotoGP. I don't know. You'd have to ask him if he thinks that's a mistake or if that was the right move. He didn't have the best time at Italtrans. But I do think that it's like the pendulum swinging the other way so hard. It's like, oh, there's an American team and the American will get it. Well, like, fuck him. It's like, well, also, he's riding the motorcycle pretty freaking well right now. Oh, if he doesn't win the Moto2 title, then they're just giving him a seat. Let me break some news to all you who think that. If Joe Roberts doesn't win the Moto2 title and gets a MotoGP seat, he's just following in the tradition of many other riders who didn't get a Moto2 World Championship and still got into MotoGP. Winning the Moto2 title is not a prerequisite for getting into MotoGP. If it were, Fabio Quartararo would not be in MotoGP. Bezzecchi, Ralph Fernandez, Luca Marini, Fermin Aldeguer. None of them would be in MotoGP. And yes, Fermin is in MotoGP. He signed the contract. He's going. He has not won a Moto2 title yet. So to say that Joe has to win the Moto2 title in order for his Trackhouse Racing promotion to be legit is just not true, because that's not the standard. They have people in the paddock that are looking at these younger classes, and they're looking at these riders and they're picking them out going, hey, there's a rider that has a lot of potential, and based on a bunch of metrics that we understand that most race fans don't, that person's fast. That's how they pluck Fabio Quartararo out of obscurity to be a world champion. It's not an accident. They have people looking at these riders going, we see something and we look much, much closer. Again, my point, experts versus amateurs watching. The experts know what to look for, and they can see raw talent and potential where we can't see it. And we're not there week in and week out. We don't see every single lap. We don't see every single minute of a weekend. We don't know. They know. They take the pick. Years ago, I mean, this is 3 years ago, Dovizioso was asked, who are you looking at in Moto2? Who's a great prospect in Moto2? And he said 2 names in that interview. He said Firmin Aldeguer. He didn't know how to pronounce his name. But he said Firmin Aldeguer looks really, really impressive. And this is before Firmin had done anything. I saw Firmin in a bar in Austin and I had no idea who he was. And he said Joe Roberts. He said those 2 are real fast. They've got bright futures ahead of them. Then Aprilia offers the seat to Joe Roberts. He turns it down. Again, maybe his mistake. Maybe he actually thinks maybe I wasn't ready yet. I was still raw. I still had more things to learn. So that's my first point. Winning the Moto2 world title is not a prerequisite to get into MotoGP. You can go through the list of fairly successful riders, including Fabio, who everyone thought was a mistake. No one thought that Fabio was coming over and to MotoGP to win. They were like, Petronas, what are you doing? Who's this guy? This is the one you want? And it was instant. How good was he? How fast? So I also think that Joe, let's look at some results. Over the last 10 races of Joe Roberts' career, this is going to back to last season with the Taltrans, where he did not have a good time. If you look at the last 10 races from this season to last season, he was in the top 10 7 out of those 10 times, and that doesn't even include the podium in India. So he's not been nowhere. He had some decent form at the end of last year. Top 10 every single week. 7 out of 10 times. It would be 8 out of 11 if I went back 11 weeks, but it felt weird to go back 11 weeks just to include that at podium. Now, we know Portimao and Austin are his favorite tracks. It'll be interesting to see if Joe Roberts can keep the form as we go into the meat of the schedule in Europe. If he does, if he can keep this form, if he can stay in the top 5 in the championship, I think he's moving to MotoGP, and I think it'll be well-deserved.